A friend of mine was working on a model of a microphone today and ran into a roadblock when it came time for modeling the metal weaved mesh here, the screen on the microphone. Let's take another look here. This screen right here, because the metal is woven together, but then it's also wrapped around this spherical shape. So it can pose quite a challenge, and I'm always up for a good challenge. I came up with a solution, and I thought it would be fun to share the solution. Now, there's several ways to go about doing it, but I think this way is fairly easy, and it's kind of fun to explore the different tools that would be used to do it. So why don't we go ahead and take a look? I'm going to minimize the image, and let's start by creating the metal weave. Well, I thought the way they would probably do it in the real world would be to have a flat mesh that would then get compressed into some kind of mold that would shape it into that spherical shape. So let's create the flat mesh first. I'm going to go over to the Create tab and choose Box, and let's just create, we're going to create part of, we'll create part of the weave. So I'm just going to make a little box here. We'll do 100 meters by 50 by 50. And the way I'm figuring out the size, I could type it in numerically. I'm just using my info window down here to figure out the size. Go ahead and add one segment using the right mouse key, sorry, the right arrow key, and hit enter. And now I need to make a dip in this shape that's going to allow me to weave the material. So I'm going to grab these middle points, T for move, and I'm going to move them down 50 meters from, it's actually, if this is 50 meters, I'm going to skip 50 meters here and put them here. Now the reason why I usually don't talk numbers when I'm modeling, because I like to just model and kind of scale when I need to. We can scale this when it's all done. I'm not really thinking about scale, but I'm remembering numbers because they'll come into play when I start cloning and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect that. Now on my object here, I've got polygons on the caps, well, on the ends here. I'm going to go ahead and select those and delete them because we don't need them, and it's actually, they'll actually get in the way when we go to clone this shape. We're going to repeat this shape over and over again. So I've basically created a V shape here, and I want to repeat that. So I'm going to come over to multiply, because I'm going to take my geometry and multiply. I'm going to add, duplicate it. So I'm going to go to clone. And with the clone settings, number of clones, well, I'm actually going to create more than I need, but it'll at least get me enough to work with. I can always trim them off if I don't need it, but I'd rather have more than not enough. So let's try 30 for the number of clones. And when you clone it, if you don't offset it, it's going to just place a bunch of copies on top of each other. So I'm looking across here, across the X, how much do I want to offset it? Well, if this was 50, because my grid size is 50, so 50 and 50 is 100, so I want to offset it by 100, so 100 millimeters. And let's go ahead hit OK. And as you can see, I'm going to hit A to fit window. I've got 30 copies of that. Now, they're not connected yet until I hit M for merge. Let's try automatic, and it tells me 120 points have been eliminated. Okay, I'm going to go full screen just for a second here so we can see our shape. It's just this zigzag, kind of like a Charlie Brown pattern. And if I hit the tab key, now I've got a sub-patch version, which is much smoother. And we're going to end up using this version for the final. But for right now, let's go back to polygonal mode by hitting the tab key. Now, I need to create another row of these, and I'm going to offset those, but I can do that manually. I don't need to use any tool for that. I'm just going to select this. Let me zoom in, T for move. I'm going to copy, paste, which is Control C, Control V, and then just move it right next to it. Okay, so it lines up, but I don't want it to. I'm going to offset it, so I'm going to select connected, T for move, and I'm going to offset it so that we've got the exact opposite. So here's a V and here's an upside down V. Okay, so they're right they're offset enough so that you can see that you have a V here and an upside down V here. So it creates this diamond pattern. And that's going to allow us to make sure that when we do the cross section, when we do the cross strips, they're going to weave in and out. So with that made, I'm just going to duplicate this a few times. So if this is 50 meters, okay, I'm going to go back to my multiply clone, and this time I want to clone down the Z. And so my offset for the X, I need to put that back to 0. And for the Z, we want to offset it the amount that we have here, which is 50, and 50 is 100. So 100 and OK. And so now we have a bunch of rows that are crisscrossing. Let's go full screen. So every other one is crisscrossing. Okay. So we have this one. Let me get a good angle on this. We have this one, and then we have this one on the inside. And then it goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Okay. So we'll use that for our grid. Now we've got way more than we need, but that's okay. Like I said, we'll just go ahead and use that. So with that made, I'm going to copy it, paste it to layer 2, put layer 1 in the background, and I'm going to hit R for rotate. I'm going to go ahead and center, go back to layer 1, center using F2. Okay, and let's see if we can get these to weave in and out. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And I'm going to go over to a corner. I think it's easier to see what's going on if I move over to a corner, like say this. And I need to place my weave in the right place. Now, it kind of looks like I might be there. The best way is for me to hit Tab to go to Subpatch, hit Tab for me to hit Subpatch. And can you see the weave? See how it's in and out? Now, it looks like a bunch of eggs or something like that. So what I'm going to do, and because I have so much geometry here, it might take it just a second, but I'm going to go over to Modify, Translate, More, Point Normal Move, and I'm just going to try and thin these up a little bit. Okay. Now, I'm only thinning up one layer, and you see how this is much thinner than this. I'm going to undo, and I'm going to cut all of it, go to layer 1, paste. And now I'm going to go ahead and do point normal move to everything because I want the weave to be the same. Modify, More, point normal move. And I'm just going to slide it a little bit. I don't want to go too much. There we go. I want to see some gaps in there. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. So, point normal move gave me the gaps that I want by sizing all the geometry based on each polygon's normal, which made it much thinner. So now I've got this nice mesh that I can work with. So I imagine at the factory when they make the microphone, and again, this is guesswork. I have no really clue on how they make the microphones, but this would be my guesswork. They have some sheets like this, and then they press it into shape. Well, instead of pressing this into shape, what we can do is we can press another shape into place and use that as a reference, and that's going to be much easier for us. So to do that, let's go ahead and because I've just learned this today by working it through, I need to remember how many clones I just used. So I'm going to say clone. I used 30. Okay, so 30 and 30 is 60, so it's 60 by 60. I'm going to go ahead and make a flat poly that we can use, and I'm going to just use the box, and I'm going to make it about the same size. The closer you are to the size, the better. So I'm using the kind of the bounding box of that entire weave, and then N for numeric, and I want a segment for each set. So let's do 60 in the X and 60 in the Z, and take a look at what our mesh looks like. Let's go to texture wire. Okay, so this is going to be our low-res version of this weave, which is of course a lot more geometry. Okay, but this is going to be what helps speed up the process. So we're not done with the modeling process. We're still going to continue modeling, but part of this is going to be modeled in layout. We're going to take advantage of some of the tools in layout. So I'm going to go ahead and save off this object. Remember, I've got two layers, the high res and the low res. That's going to be important. And the high res is in layer 1 and the low res is in layer 2. Let's go File, Save Object As, and we're going to call this Mike 001. I like using version numbers when I work. Hit Save, and we're ready to move over to Layout. So we'll come up here and send Object to Layout, and it sends both objects over. It's one object, but it's broken up in two layers. And remember, when you have a multi-layered object, when it comes into layout, each layer is treated as a separate object. I'm going to select both objects and let's raise them up. Zoom out a little bit and raise it up a little bit. Okay. So the object that I want to work with is going to be layer 2, which is the low-res mesh. And what we're going to do is we're going to use dynamics. First, I'm going to set up a collision object for us to work with. So I'm going to move over to Add Dynamic Object and choose Collision. And normally I change the name, but since we're only going to use this as a temp file to get the model we need, I'm going to just go ahead and leave that. And we have to determine the size that we need to wrap this around. Now we can always change it, and we might actually end up doing that, but I'm going to go ahead and just say let's try 1.5. No, that does look too big. 1.25. Yeah, I'm just trying to see how that's going to look wrapped around this. And to be honest, why don't we just try default and then we can come back, because maybe 1 meter is going to be what we need. For the bounce or bind power, I'm going to lower that. I'm not expecting the sheet to bounce off of it or to go flying away. And so I'm going to actually add 50 for the friction and 50 for the fixed power. We can always go back and adjust this, and we probably will end up if we don't get the result that we need right away. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Go back to layer 2, which is my low-res object, and let's go ahead and add cloth dynamics. So P for properties. I'll come over to the dynamics tab, and under add dynamic, choose cloth. Double click for the settings, and we're going to skip this for now. We're going to use a preset and then adjust as we need to. But for collision, let's see, collision detect. Yes, and you can just choose the surface. I just go ahead and hit all, even though it's kind of the same in this case because there was only one surface. Okay, under etc., let's add some gravity. I'm just going to say -10. I can always change that. And for preset, let's just try silk again. These presets only make sense based on certain scale, and I haven't really been thinking about scale at this point. This is just going to be a starting point. Okay, so let's go ahead and calculate and see what it looks like. So it falls because of gravity, and it wraps around the mesh. And to tell you the truth, for what we need, this is actually going to work. The reason I'm kind of excited is sometimes you have to go and tweak this stuff, but I'm not going to use the final, which gives me these little ripples and that kind of thing, as you can see right there. I'm going to back up a little bit. We only need one frame of this, so I'm going to get the frame that looks something like this. And what I'm really looking at is, do I go past the halfway point, right? And if my collision object is a sphere and it's centered at the origin, then the origin is the halfway point, and I can see that I clearly pass the halfway point. We're going to get rid of all of this when the time comes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is come back over here, and I'm going to keep this calculation, but on my layer 1 object, the high-res object, I'm going to link it to the low-res object. So the first thing I need to do for that is M for motion options, and I'm going to parent layer 1 here to layer 2. Okay, and then let's go back to properties, and under the deform tab, I'm going to add a displacement, and I'm going to choose effects metal link. Okay, now what effects metal link does is it allows me to use the low-res object, just that flat sheet. I'm going to use the low-res object to drive the motion of the high-res object. What that does is stops me from having to calculate as many points as that's on the high-res version. I can just use the low-res version, which is, in my opinion, much faster. So right now, because it's so many points, it's taking a second to update. So we'll wait a second for it to. It's basically merging the two together. It's saying use the low res to drive the high res. So it's giving it some thought. We do have a lot of geometry there. Remember that the subpatch, even if we had 3 polygons, at a subpatch of 3, that's 9 polygons for every 3 polygons. So we've actually got a second to go. Okay, so there it goes. So it's okay. It gave me time to explain what was going on. It doesn't always take so long. It just depends on how many points it's got to figure out between the two. So now when I scrub here, you can see, I just love this. This just looks great. So you can see the mesh, the high-res mesh. I didn't have to calculate it. I know it took a second to update, but we do have a lot of geometry there. But let's take a closer look. Look at that. We got the weave. It's wrapping around. It's even giving us that pattern that, remember, it wasn't just a cross-grid pattern on there. It does get tighter here. It's looser up here, and then it gets tighter here in the corners. So I pretty much see what I'm after with this mesh. And I'm going to use frame 40. Again, we could use any frame that we want, but let's go ahead and use frame 40. Now, the trick is I've got to get this back into Modeler because I'm not done modeling. I have all this excess down here I got to get rid of. But one thing that you might want to do is if I were to go and change to texture shaded solid with wireframe, you can see that it's freezing. It's converting the sub-Ds into a polygonal mesh, which at render time will become triangles. If I don't want that in my model, what I need to do is before I take this back into Modeler, I need to come over to the Geometry tab. And now it's not going to look as pretty for a second, but that's okay. This is just a temporary thing. I'm going to go over to Display Subpatch Level. I don't really need to change the display because all that really matters is the render, but I'm going to change both. I just want to make sure that that's how many polygons I want to send back over to Modeler. So it actually kind of has a neat look, not what we're going for the mic. So let's also go back over to texture shaded solid without the wireframe. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this, and now I need to get this mesh back over to Modeler in this way, because remember, it's really not in that shape. It's being driven that way by a displacement tool. So let's go over to File, Save, Trans Object. That's transformed object. So I'll select that now. Fortunately, it gives me a warning so I don't make a mistake. It says select a different file name for the transformed object if you want to keep the original object geometry. This is important. I don't want to override my geometry. What if I want to make changes? So I hit OK. And we called this mic 001. I'm going to actually call this mic trans 001. So I know that it's the transformed object. Hit save. Okay, and now I'm going to hop back over to Modeler, and let's load up that object that we just saved. So File, Load Object, and mic trans 001. Open that up, and let's go to full window. And as you can see, because we changed our subpatch level back in layout, when we bring it in, it's not tripled, it's not polygons, it's back to the sub-D that we originally sent over. And here you go. Look at this mesh. I love this. We've got our weave. It's in the shape that we were going for. I think it was fairly harmless putting this together. Now we do have all this extra geometry. Now I was showing this technique to Ron Thornton today, and I said, yeah, but look at all these frays. I got to get rid of this. And he was like, well, if you were to actually remove that casing that sits around it, well, you would see this as well. Because, again, this is most likely the way that it was built in the real world by pressing it into a shape. But we definitely don't need all this extra. That would be wasted geometry, and we don't need that for render time. So I'm going to go ahead and let's copy and paste this to a new layer just so I have a backup. Okay, and I'm going to get rid of some of this geometry. Now I could lasso select, I could manually select, but I'm going to go over to the View tab and choose Volume Selection. And I'm not going to go right to 0 in the Y. I'm going to come a little bit below it. I don't mind having a little bit of extra geometry that I can hide behind that that little ring that goes around the mic. And with this volume selection drawn out, I'm going to hit delete. And then let's take a look. So I was able to shave quite a few polys off. Now I still have all these little frays that come out, but again, that's going to be hidden by, let's take a look at our mic here. That's going to be hidden by this ring. Now, this is a little more oval shape. If you were to go to, let's say, Google and type in microphone, you'll see all different shapes. You'll see a perfect hemisphere, you'll see this shape, you'll see more boxy shapes. All you really need to do is create your collision object over in Layout when you're using Cloth Dynamics. Create your collision object in the shape that you want the weave to be on top of, and you'll be set. So, throw a reflective surface on this, finish off the mic, which if we take a look, pretty simple shape. We've got a disc that's kind of tapered, bevel it out here, maybe add some little micro bevels, cut in this little switch, either stencil or put a texture map to put on our graphics here, and we have a completed mic with, in my opinion, the most complicated piece out of the way. The rest of it, that's a piece of cake. And as you can see, this can be a piece of cake as well using this technique. Now, it's not limited to this technique. There's other ways that you can go about it. But for me, if I was under the gun, like we were earlier today, trying to make deadline on a project, this was an easy way to get there, and it gave us the exact result we were after. So hopefully you've picked up a few things in this video, and the next time you have to create a metal weave like this that's not flat and in some kind of shape, this just might be the trick to help you out.